All right, everyone, it's 6 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Renee Casterline. I'm the chair of the Mount Shasta Recreation and Park District Board. We are going to call the meeting to order, at which point we will get started. So Cindy, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Give us a roll call, please.
Okay, Bromell-Smith,
Here.
Caporazzo. Caporazzo.
She's on mute.
Okay. Johnston,
Here.
Rush,
Here.
Caporazzo,
Here.
and Chairman Casterline.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Cindy. All right, I am managing the backside of this at the same time, so I apologize for a slight delay as we get this live on Facebook where people can join us there too. So I want to welcome you all to tonight's community input meeting for the Youth Sports Park, one of the facilities that the Mount Shasta Recreation and Park District manages. This is part of a series of meetings that we've been doing throughout the year. All of them have been Zoom meetings now that we're still in COVID. So we really appreciate you being here tonight and providing your input. To give you a sense of how the meeting will go tonight, Shannon Shaw, our district administrator, will give a welcome and orientation, and Tom Hesseldens, who has worked with the district on our master plan update, will give a presentation tonight. That presentation will be done in segments, and at the end of each segment, we will take the opportunity to take any questions or comments that you have. You can do that through the chat window, and you can also use the Q&A, although if you do use the chat window, that provides us a better opportunity to have your comment recorded into the actual meeting. So throughout the meeting, we'll pause to give you the opportunity to ask questions, and the way that we like to do that, acquaint yourself with the raise hand function. Because if you do have a comment or a question you'd like to make, if you raise your hand, when we get to the end of that segment, I will call on you so that we can hear what you have to say. And we're really looking forward to your input. We'll be keeping an eye on Facebook as well. So any folks who are watching there who enter comments or questions in on Facebook, we can pick that up as well. So thanks for being here. At this point, I am going to turn it over to Shannon.
Thank you, Renee. And thank you for everybody who's tuning in tonight. Hopefully you aren't completely zoomed out, but we really do appreciate the input from the community and from some of the key stakeholders as we look at this specific property. You may or may not know that the Recreation District manages the properties, but we don't actually own any of them. And so that's one of the interesting things about the Youth Sports Park. With that, Renee did a great job, thank you, of kind of going over the process of being involved in this conversation tonight. We do prefer the raise hand, that way we're able to listen to your comments. But if you'd like to, feel free to enter some information into the chat or the Q&A, and we will be following along with that throughout the meeting. Thank you again. Your input is extremely valued, and I'm going to turn it over to Tom Hesseldens now.
Thanks, Shannon. I'm going to switch screens. Oh, huh. Let me try that again. Is my screen up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Excellent. So as Shannon was saying, tonight the focus is on the Youth Sports Park. And she was showing a map earlier, but this is the entire district, 142 square miles. And within that very large area, here's the 3 parks that the Rec District currently manages: City Park, Shasta East Park, and Youth Sports Park, which, okay, where is it? At any rate, it exists. A master plan was done in 2003 mostly focused on the city park and Chastis Park, but the one facility that was mentioned at the youth sports park was Sisson Field. And that was proposed at the time, and it is now completed. In the 2020 master plan update, we had a public webinar on July 29th for the city park. We did 2 of them for Chastis Park because there's so much going on there, September 12th and 14th. And tonight we'll focus just on the youth sports park. And at some point within the next couple of months, we want to talk about potential facilities and programs that the rec district could be involved in. And that could be the Mount Shasta Greenway project that the Trail Association has been working on for years with the Land Trust and the Rotary Club. And the idea of a Mill Pond Park at the south end of town that the city's been involved in off and on. The idea of pocket parks. And very recently, just wondering what's going to happen with the Crystal Geyser site, which includes Spring Hill. And then Lake Siskiyou and Box Canyon. So that'll follow up within a couple months or so after tonight. So focusing on the youth sports park, these are the segments that Renee was mentioning. And at the end of each of these, I will stop and Renee will take over, and then people can ask questions and give public input. So that is the whole point of the meeting tonight, is to get public input, to let the community know what's out there now and some ideas for the future, but find out what would the community like to see. So we'll start with the existing ball fields, the users and the amounts of use, and then some potential additional or alternative uses of the site, discussion of roads, parking, and ADA compliance, multi-use trails and bikeways in the vicinity, various programs and events that involve the youth sports park site, existing and potential funding, and any additional community input that you may have. The youth sports park was established in 1976. And Mount Shasta has long been a community that's been very active with ball sports. A lot of people have contributed. These are the properties that comprise it. It started here on city land under lease to the rec district. That involves the main ball field, t-ball, soccer field, picnic area, concessions and restrooms, and then this is a storage shed here. The city, the same parcel crosses Lake Street and it's over here, and the Scout Hall building is here, but this is not included in the lease for the youth sports park. And then
your indicator isn't really showing when you say here. I don't know whether you could make it bigger.
Oh, you know what? This shows me 2 screens, and I was making a point of using the one in front of the camera. Thank you. I need to move my cursor over to the other screen. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it looks like it's on the right screen now.
Yes. So here's the main ball field, t-ball, soccer field, and picnic area. So this comprised the original youth sports park area. And then more recently, Sisson Field was added, which is under lease from the school district. And I was mentioning the Scout Hall over here is also on this same city property, but not part of the lease for the youth sports park. And this is currently unused school land that could be considered for uses in the future, which we'll talk about more later. This half is wetlands and would make sense to manage with Sisson Meadow. This is what we could talk about. So I'll get to that. Regarding the ball field usage, John Kennedy Jr. sent an email to Shannon that itemized these various uses and times of year, times of day, age range of 4 to 14, the average number of participants. So this was all really useful information. We don't have the information yet for the soccer use, although that also goes on there. Shannon, I think you sent an email today that I didn't get a chance to look at. Do you want to talk to that briefly? You're on mute.
Yeah, no, so we have a general rundown of soccer, 2 seasons per year, one in the spring, one in the fall season being very, very busy with youth soccer and also high school soccer. Looking at this facility though, they use the 2 fields down there at the youth sports park for soccer 4 to 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. I mean, it's very used space. About 202 participants last year, I believe, for the fall soccer and around 80 for the spring soccer.
And some of that occurs over here, doesn't it? On part of Sisson Field.
Exactly.
And what this air photo doesn't show, this is actually off of Google Earth, but there's now an outfield fence here and then additional space here for soccer. And the school uses this field as well. So moving on. That was a fairly brief section, but we would like to hear from the participants tonight on any thoughts or information they may have on these 4 fields or any other existing uses at the Youth Sports Park. So I'll turn it over to Renee.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So far we have one question, and that's from Michael Williams. And he asked if, he says, I know the rec district leases the city land for the youth sports park. Does the district officially lease school land for the Sisson Field, or is it more of a joint use agreement?
It is a lease. When I worked with the Rotary Club to do this trail from the library over to Lake Street, Terry Taffro wrote the lease for the trail, and he was the one who had written it for Sisson Field and for the city property here. And it was a 40-year lease at the time, and he made the timetable on the trail consistent with the rest of it. So it's my understanding that it's all under this, basically the same lease.
Okay, thanks, Tom. That looks like all we have for right now. So,
Could I ask a question, Renee?
Yeah.
Wondering if any of the participants might know who uses the main ball field versus the ball field that's on Sisson Field. It looks like the main ball field is a more developed field, although now, you know, as Tom said, the picture doesn't show the outfield fence that's there, and it does have dugouts on Sisson Field. I was just wondering if we know which groups use which of those 2, because those are the 2 developed ball fields.
Yeah, I can answer that. It's a softball and baseball delineation between those 2 fields. The one on the Sisson Field is more primarily used for softball.
okay. If we don't have any other questions, and I don't see, oh, wait, Michael Williams has his hand raised. Michael, let me unmute you. Okay, Michael, let's see if we can hear you.
Thank you, Renee.
Thanks.
I was just, I've spoken to a number of the folks that run the baseball program there over the years, and we've had discussions about them paying money to the rec district and their estimation of what it really costs to keep the facilities up. And I was just wondering if the rec district had a philosophy or a guideline about how much to charge people for facilities that they use against how much it costs to actually keep those facilities up, or is it just kind of been continued, grandfathered in historically? Is there an approach to, a uniform approach to pricing that kind of thing? Thanks, Renee.
You bet. I'm sure Shannon can speak to that.
Yeah, so there's been a grandfathered kind of operation of using the sports field, and that's actually one of the things I'm doing right now is breaking apart the costs of those fields, the operating costs, and also the usage of those fields to see moving forwards what an appropriate breakout would be while being able to provide an amazing service to the community. So kind of in the process of creating that structure, Michael.
All right, thanks, Shannon. So that looks like that's all for now. So Tom, we'll move on to your next segment.
Okay. The next segment has to do with potential additional or alternative uses of the site. The possibility of the museum relocating there, possibility of a museum library combo, or just the fact that the library already is next door, possible regional interpretive center. The city's been talking about a new community center for a very long time. Recently, the Boys and Girls Club has been talking about wanting a venue of their own. And then the idea of the Performing Arts Center, which has been bouncing around for several years now and hasn't really landed on a number of sites have been considered. This shows some potential sites for other uses. And what this would be based on would be arriving at a conclusion that some or all of the sports activities could be relocated to Shastis Park, depending on the level of use of existing ball fields at Shastis. So I'll jump ahead to that real quick. So you've got the existing softball field, a multi-use field with another diamond on it, and the field here that the high school has. So all three of these are in use, and then a multi-use field up here that doesn't have a diamond on it, but it's got used for soccer. And I believe there's soccer's done down here as well. So the basic question is, would it make sense over time to consolidate all ball sports at Shastis? And this ties to a bigger picture that's been discussed as part of the master planning to have the city park be a natural area park, have Shastis Park be the sports park, and then the youth sports park, do we want to continue partially or completely with that theme, or would it make sense over time to have it become more of a campus of facilities and activities that have to do with the community in other respects, such as library, museum, community center, performing arts center, those sorts of things. So that's really the gist of this. And it has some history to it because the Rotary Club was founded in 1950 by Gino Marconi and some other folks. And their very first project was doing the city library. And they've put money into improving it over the years. And there was talk of possibly relocating it over to here, taking advantage of views of Mount Shasta. The reason these rectangles are all aimed the way they are is because of the view of Mount Shasta. There's parking constraints in this location here. There's wetlands, limits on how much larger the building can be made. So that goes back 15 or 20 years, the idea of maybe doing something over here. And then very recently, Ken threw out the idea of, well, maybe this site could be used here. And I show it overlapping on two parcels here a little bit, but it could be kept on city property. Again, trying to take advantage of views. Here it has the views as well. So that's where things could be located, and it would result in one or more of these fields no longer being usable. So this really requires a lot of community input on what the thoughts are, but I have more to share on this to help spur some creative thinking. Right now, the museum is down by the fish hatchery. If it were to ever expand or relocate, having it up there by Sisson Field is so close to the heart of town, it really makes for a community center to focus on that site. The library, a lot of work is going on right now about expanding the library, trying to figure out the parking. They didn't do an alternative sites analysis, but there's some talk that maybe that would be a good thing to do. This building could be repurposed for the school or even the Boys and Girls Club. This idea of a regional interpretive center, I was suggesting this back when the Weed Botanic Gardens were first getting started, because our region is so diverse, so unique, and a lot of people who live here don't realize that it's one of the world's most diverse regions, biologically, geologically. And Mount Shasta is perfectly positioned to have a center that interprets that. When the Forest Service did the Volcanic Legacy Scenic Byway, they wanted to create such a facility down on the old mill site at the south end of town. And they had a $4 million grant from Caltrans. Forest Service hired me to do some site planning. And I have a drawing of that somewhere. Where is that? There it is. But this building was 20,000 square feet. But it was focused on the views of Mount Shasta, Black Butte, Mount Eddy, Trinity Divide, Castle Spire. And they wanted it at the intersection of Highway 89 and Interstate 5, and then 97 as part of the Scenic Byway as well. Anyway, there are examples in our relatively nearby of this sort of approach of more of a dynamic state-of-the-art museum approach. The High Desert Museum by Bend, Oregon interprets that region and is very popular. And of course, Monterey Bay Aquarium, up to the point prior to Monterey Bay Aquarium, aquaria around the world tended to be a hodgepodge of fish from all over the place with no real tie to their ecological setting. Here, this kelp forest is what you have in Monterey Bay, and it's hugely popular. And if we did an inland version of that here, I think it would really catch on. But one of the concerns about the Discovery Center was that it was too big. There were concerns that it wouldn't bring in enough money, wouldn't be sustainable. If something smaller, but still regionally designed, were to be located at the Youth Sports Park, you would have incredible views of Mount Shasta, Black Butte and Spring Hill, Mount Eddy, and Castle Spire. So it really is a very good location. It would also be a potential location for a new community center. The existing one on Ivy Street has horrible acoustics. The Upper Lodge is often used. It has some acoustic issues and it's not very large. At some point, I think it would be good for the city to have a new community center. And there's ideas of combining these facilities into one or couple buildings. And it turns out nationwide that the idea of combining libraries and museums is really catching on and attracting a lot of grant funding because it makes them more dynamic, more interactive. They just don't become a dusty old repository of the past. So that's something to seriously consider. And I mentioned the Volcanic Legacy Scenic Byway Community Center and the Performing Arts Center. I've tried to get more information on this. They were looking at the high school site. COS recently got a very large grant to redo Ford Theater. So that'll be more of a regional performing arts center. But the idea that the Nancy Driscoll Foundation had was something more for the local schools, the high school and Sisson School, but it could also be used by the community, and having those combined would make a lot of sense. And as I was saying, there's been a lot of work done nationwide on this idea of combining libraries and museums and archives. If something like that were to be done at the Youth Sports Park, and it required relocating one or more ball fields to where Shasta East Park existing fields weren't enough and we needed one or more additional fields, the high school owns all of this undeveloped land where currently there's a user trail and a disc golf course. There's something like 18 acres there. So there's quite a bit of land. So there's the possibility of doing one or more ball fields there. So this is probably the biggest section of the evening, and I've covered a lot of information here, but now it's time for me to turn it over to Renee to hear what the attendees think about this.
All right. Thanks, Tom. And so far, I am not seeing questions or folks raising their hands, but we'd love to have any of you speak to this. There are definitely some people attending tonight who are associated with some of these facilities. So, all right, Jean, thanks for raising your hand. Let me get you unmuted. Hold on. Jean, go ahead and try it.
All right.
Okay,
Yeah.
we can hear you. Yeah, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think that a community-wide center that included many of those aspects would be wonderful for our community. Walking distance from all the schools, just such a center for our community. And when anyone came to town, that would be a place for them to go. And then the other two parks not being that far away either. I just think it's a wonderful idea.
Jean, thanks for your comments. Do you have any thoughts on, elements that would make that project successful, or elements that we definitely need to consider? I mean, I think that parking is one of those things, but Jean, do you have any other things in mind that would be helpful in, considering how these different community facilities could come together successfully?
Well, I know I've just been doing the history of our museum right now, and for it to be successful in a small town like ours for 40 years, what they did first is they went and studied other towns. The success they've had with those kinds of centers for the community, and interviewed them. And the same thing happened when I went and got my degree in museum studies. I went into 20 small museums and interviewed everybody there to find out the best ideas. So that would be what I would say would be a great research project for someone.
Yeah, thanks, Jean. All right. Any of our other attendees have any thoughts to contribute to this idea of, concentrating community elements, whether it's concerns, partners that you think should be involved, things that you might want to share that we would need to consider as we look at this idea? Because, certainly asking that question of repurposing the youth sports park area to other services for the community and concentrating youth sports up at Shasta East is a big conversation for the community. So we would love to hear more. And if you don't have comments tonight, you are always welcome to follow up with Shannon or Tom or members of the board. So if you don't think of anything tonight, please get back to us. Jean, did I not lower your hand, or did you just raise it again?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't raise my hand. No.
Okay, I did not lower it then. All right, well then, I don't see any other questions or comments coming through. So, oh wait.
Renee, could I add something?
Yes.
I don't know if there's a way for me to raise hands.
You can, and Brandy just raised hers.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Ken.
Another thing I thought of, the Dunsmuir Botanical Gardens is fantastic. And one of the things about the New Mexico, the Santa Fe Museum Hill, is their city botanical gardens is also located on Museum Hill. And if that area was developed as a whole with the different facilities Tom mentioned, and maybe even kind of L-shaping around to that area that is part of the school that the school doesn't use in the southern part, it would be a lot of property that could be developed as a kind of wandering botanical gardens, not a one area like it is in Dunsmuir or New Mexico, but instead interspersed throughout all the buildings. It'd be a great opportunity for lots of native plants and to connect it into the Sisson Meadows area. And I just think that would be another opportunity for really enhancing that area.
I will add to that when the Botanic Gardens were proposed at South Weed, they wanted to do a Bouchard Gardens type botanical gardens like the one up in British Columbia, which is just a hodgepodge of plants from around the world. It's beautiful and it's a tourist attraction, but what High Desert Museum does is similar to what you're saying, Ken, with all natives from the high desert.
Mhm.
And what I had suggested to the folks in Weed was that they focus on plants native to our bioregion here. It's so incredibly diverse and a lot of very beautiful plants. And that when College of the Siskiyous finished its new biology building, I was suggesting they do that on a small scale there because they wanted a landscape around the building. And I worked with Bill Hurt on the idea of including boulders from each rock type in our region, which are incredibly diverse as well. And you could have plant communities associated with certain rock types. So you could really get creative with this and have it be a beautiful landscape and educational at the same time. So I think that's a great idea, and that would be something that would fit right into this.
Thanks, Tom. We have a couple of other hands raised. Brandy, I'm going to come to you right now, and then Michael, I'll come to you next. Brandy, go ahead.
So Tom, and I didn't bring this up at the Shastis meetings. However, if moving the ballparks from the youth sports park over to Shastis, would it be wise to rethink how the ballparks are currently spaced? As it seems like they take, it's great because they're kind of all far apart, but in going up to, you know, when you go up to Medford, they have the, was it the Bear Creek ballpark facility up there? You know, they're very tight. So they're putting like 8 ballparks in a pretty small space. And so I was wondering if that would be an option at Shastis, reconfiguring the ball fields and the soccer fields.
One way that
You don't have to answer that. It's just a comment.
Yeah. Well, a quick answer. One way that's done is you can see each one is sort of like a quarter of a pie, especially this one. So if you orient 4 of them together, you can be very efficient about space. Where it gets messy here is you've got the tennis courts here already. You have a lot of trees up in here, community garden, dog park. There's grade differences elevationally. There could be some consolidation, yes. It take a lot of work to figure out the best way to try to pull that off. Worth considering, though.
All right, thanks. Michael, I'm coming to you next, and you should be unmuted.
Thank you, Renee. So my assumption had been that this was a planning process. And there are a couple things I'm not seeing that I think would be beneficial to the process. We're seeing a lot of great ideas. Some of the ideas have been around for a decade. But what I've seen very little of is public input about what they want, what they're not getting right now from current facilities, what they want to see more of, and or data about what kind of facilities are needed. For example, tennis courts. In the 2.5 decades I've been here, it seems like there's been a marked decrease in the use of the tennis courts. They used to have a tournament that would take up both the tennis courts down at the resort and at Shastis. People would come up from Reading and play, but that hasn't happened for, I don't know, quite a few years. I think Dee Fryer was the main organizer of that. And so I'm curious, what's the use data behind some of these facilities? Does it lend itself to the rec district putting in or remodeling the tennis courts and whatever other facilities we're dealing with? Or do we want to do something different, like seems like the up and coming sport around here is the pickleball thing. So we have great ideas, but I'm not hearing much from the public. Like, I haven't heard anything from equestrians yet, or some of the younger folks that might have different types of ideas about, you know, yeah, they're in high school, they're in their physical education class, and they get a fixed menu. You can either do tennis or volleyball or whatever their menu is. Are there other types of sports they're interested in that might be something the rec district would be looking at? Oh, and the second item, I mentioned two things that I haven't seen yet. The second item is I haven't seen anything either public input wise or from the board about what's the mission statement, what are the goals, what are the aspirational things that are being targeted with this process. You know, are there guidelines, are there goals, are there things that this process should be meeting? And that often helps to scope down some of these conversations. That's it. Thank you, Renee.
All right. Thanks, Michael. And I think there are probably a couple of folks who will speak to the questions that you asked. But one of the things that I want to share before I pass it off to Shannon, and I think Tom might have some input too, is that the community outreach meetings that we've been doing this year, that's one of the ways that we have been working to collect input from people. And then Shannon has done surveys online. We're also looking at, you know, how in this time of COVID can we reach out to groups that we're not seeing, or even individuals that we're not seeing in these meetings. So we continue to look at this process and make revisions to get input from more diverse groups. And prior to COVID, in the last year and a half or so, we've actually had a number of groups come and make presentations at board meetings, pickleball, tennis courts, swim team folks who are interested in a pool. So outside of what we have been doing formally during this master plan update process, prior to that, in the last year and a half or so, we had gotten input from vocal groups, and that's great. And I think, you know, part of what you're speaking to is the need to reach out to other groups in the community who haven't stepped up yet for us to hear what they have to say. So those are my thoughts on that question of really getting diverse community input. And I will ask Shannon to pick it up and add to that. Are you stuck on mute? There you go.
Gonna get my space bar to work there for a second. Yeah, thank you for the question, Michael. COVID has definitely put an interesting twist towards our community input. And this is, like Renee said, one of the ways that we're reaching out to those groups. We're also in conversations with schools and local clubs as far as how to reach out to people who haven't been involved through this platform for their input and see what they're thinking for the future of these parks districts. So this is just one of the ways we're doing that. It is taking a little bit more time than we had wanted with a little bit of the delays, and just being able to have meetings with people. Having a Zoom meeting with some of those younger kids is a little bit more difficult to get the information that we're wanting. But we've also been able to work with the city and some other groups on information they've collected in the last few years that would also kind of lend themselves to us as far as the information that we would be able to put into this master plan. And I believe that I did send you the goals of the plan, and correct me if that's not right, but I can always make sure I can send those to you as far as what the board agreed to with this project. So I'll pass it over to Tom.
And could I add something there too, Shannon? We did hear a lot from kids relatively on the Chastis call. I think there were more kids on that call, on those two calls, than on any of the other ones so far. So, but it's very hard to get kids to get onto these Zoom calls.
Jean Nels has her hand up. Hold on, Jean. Let me get you unmuted. Go ahead, Jean.
All right. I was thinking about getting more of that young people's input. Has anyone thought about whether they could contact Interact at the high school? And that's what, about 12 kids. But still, that could be one of their meetings, perhaps, or part of one of their meetings. Isn't just something to ask, perhaps?
Yeah, thanks, Jean. That is a great idea. And it just made me think of another club at the school too. And yeah, I think, trying to connect with younger kids and then asking them to help us connect to their peers, maybe the way forward as we all adjust to changes that sometimes feel daily. But thanks, Jean. So Tom, we will come back to you, and if you want to speak to Michael's question or if you want to move on, I'll leave that up to you.
Well, a lot we covered at Shastis, and even tonight we indicated we're trying to get use data. So what John Kennedy provided was very helpful. We want to get a lot more. It's because of how we're going about this, it's things are mixed together. We're putting out ideas that we've had. We're asking for ideas from the community. We have some use data. There's a lot we don't have. It's hard to do a gaps analysis without having all the data. So we will get there. That is the master planning process. So I'm excited about how much we've been able to do virtually. And I should mention that when we get to the point of preparing a draft master plan in a document form, after receiving all this input and looking at a needs assessment for the community, that draft document will go out to the whole community for review and comment. So that, I think, might help gel a lot of the thoughts that people have had and really give the rec district constructive input on, is it heading in the right direction? Help the rec district fine tune that direction. So I think that will also help get us to where we want to go. That being said, you want me to dive into the next segment?
Yep.
Roads, parking, and drainage.
Oh, hey, Tom, hold on a second. I see another raised hand.
Oh.
Leslie, let me get you unmuted. Go ahead, Leslie. We should be able to hear you.
The only thing I wanted to add to that last question that Michael had was, and I apologize if it was said and I just didn't hear it. We did do a survey online seeking input from the whole community, and I think we got some really good input from that. So Shannon, I don't know if I didn't hear you mention that in your response, but I think that was another way that we've reached out to the public.
Yeah, that survey feedback has been wonderful and very diverse. So that has been another one of the ways in which we're having those, the outreach is happening to the community through that surveys process as well.
All right.
And a whole other set of data that we have is coincidentally, the city has been working on its general plan update, and it has been doing outreach and will share all of its survey data and public meeting data with us so that we can consolidate it all together.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Leslie. And I don't see any other raised hands or comments. So Tom, go ahead and move on to your next segment.
So the next segment is roads, parking, and drainage. Actually, not a drainage issue here. Existing parking improvements, library parking constraints, and ADA compliance. So here is the existing site, and here's the parking. It's all gravel. It's not defined in terms of how people should park, how to make the parking efficient. When Steve Mitrovich was the superintendent of Sisson, Mount Shasta School District, he wanted to look at this. So he had me draw up what could be done about that potentially. So this is a lot of parking, but you can see that it fits. So just for the youth sports park, more than enough parking could be provided. And if part or all of the site were used for some of the other uses that we've discussed, this parking configuration would change, of course, but there wouldn't be a problem getting adequate parking. Over at the library, this was the main focus that Steve had, because the district, the operations of the school and the library were often somewhat conflicting when it came to parking, with the buses coming, parents coming to drop off kids, pick them up. The district office is here. They did staff parking up here, but they needed more staff parking. And the idea of expanding the library, they thought, well, they could put some public parking here, some more staff parking over here. So these were ideas that were all kicked around in 2009. So it's no longer current, obviously, but generally you can see that there's a serious problem with adequate parking for the library right here. Plenty of room for parking and ingress egress over here. The ADA issue that came up was when the youth sports park was built in 1976. ADA, I don't think it had even passed yet, so it wasn't an issue. So, you know, you've got stairs, there's no way to get to the restrooms in what is now the current requirement of a grade no greater than 5%, or if it is, you have to have a landing every 20 feet and railings both sides to get this gently ramped. And it could be reconfigured fairly easily, but it's something that the district, at some point may have to deal with. Regarding multi-use trails, there's existing trails, potential trails on site, potential connections to other parks and schools, and various street routes. Michael Williams with ATC has worked considerably on street routes and on this connector B Street coming down here, and has proposed cutting over to the alley here, the Castle Street alley, and then up and through the Garden Greenway property. Through Rotary, we started with the Sisson Overlook Trail here. So the black lines are all existing. The boardwalks in Sisson Meadow, and then this is the 8-foot wide paved trail above the meadow. And the plan I'd been working on was to continue with this routing, picking up C Street and B Street, and then heading the other direction, tying in with the city park and tying in up this direction to the high school and Shasta East Park and up to Gateway and up to Horse Camp via the Sisson Southern Trail. And then for many years, the idea of a Castle Street Park has been considered, so there could be some sort of tie-in coming down this way. And this would be the main corridor of the Mount Shasta Greenway project, which started as the Downtown to City Park Trail project. So I just wanted to show how the youth sports park site could potentially tie in trail-wise and street route-wise with the rest of the community. And this is the Rotary Trail, or the Sisson Overlook Trail, 8-foot wide, which is the minimum for non-motorized multi-use trails. So that's the end of that segment. And Renee, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And I'm going to keep an eye out to see if we've got any hands coming up. None yet. And obviously, if you have a thought come to mind, you can add a comment or raise your hand and we can come back to this. But I'm not seeing any hands come up, Tom, so I think we can move on to your next segment.
The next segment is programs and events. Obviously, at a lot of ball field events, baseball, softball, t-ball, soccer, various library events. The Boys and Girls Club has been using library facilities and Sisson school facilities up until very recently with the COVID issue. Sisson school uses the Sisson Field. I don't know if the high school uses anything at the Youth Sports Park site. And then, of course, the potential for the museum, performing arts, and regional interpretive center, et cetera. So that's a very brief segment. But if anybody participating tonight has any suggestions on programs they'd like to see, events, other uses of the site, I'm making a distinction here between facilities themselves in terms of the infrastructure, the buildings, and the various things that might go on at the site. So Renee, back to you.
All right, thanks, Tom. Yeah, and for those of you who are here with us tonight, and any of you who look at this at some point in the future, if you're looking at the recording, we are very curious to get your comments, and particularly if you're participating in any of these kinds of events, we'd love to hear from you in terms of what we can do with facilities to help support these events and how they're put on. So for folks who have kids in the youth sports, we'd love to hear your comment. Like I said, at any point in time, and you can comment in the future. We'd love to hear about what can make these facilities function better and any concerns that you have about these facilities. I know at various points in the planning process, we've talked about safety, we've talked about lighting at facilities. So I am not seeing any hands come up yet, but again, raise your hand anytime you have a comment you want to share. So Tom, we'll come back to you.
Okay. The last section here has to do with funding. So the district does get existing funding from property taxes and various donor sources. And there are existing ball field use fees. Shannon can elaborate, but my understanding is it's based on the number of kids using them. And potential income that could come from new facilities at the site. Various public and private grants. We've looked closely at Prop 68, the McConnell Foundation, Ford Family Foundation. With Volcanic Legacy, if the folks involved in that felt like this site was close enough to Highway 5 and Highway 89 that they would consider it as the interpretive center that they wanted to see at the south end of town, that could potentially open up $4 or $5 million of grant funding right at the get-go. And that's something we need to look into. And if there were a facility for the Boys and Girls Club, they mentioned that that national program has some funding. And then of course, the rec district has tried twice now to get an assessment that almost passed. Well, it was a majority on the ballots, but it needs 2/3. But before the rec district tries a third time, we want to get through this master planning process and really quantify what the financial needs are and how that money would be used. So the youth sports park is one key component of that. So that briefly summarizes the funding part of it as I have it. Maybe Shannon, you want to elaborate, but otherwise I'll turn it back to you guys.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And Tom, I think that we're at the end of your segments. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Jean, I see your hand up and you should be unmuted. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that that site that you were at, the IMLS, they give huge grants every year for something just as what you're proposing.
Ah.
Yes. Government site, yes.
All right. Thanks for sharing that, Jean.
And I should have said that if there were a regional interpretive center, it would generate income potentially considerably. That's the key challenge, is to figure out how to have it big enough but not too big and have it be a net income generator. But what Jean was saying there, that was one of the sites I had gone to get information on that idea of combining libraries and museums. And I I didn't realize that they gave grants, so that's very exciting. I'll look into that more.
All right, thanks, Tom. Michael, let me get you unmuted. Go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Renee. Just a comment with my active transportation hat on. A comment on parking. There have been a number of recent studies that show parking is an actual stimulant to driving. So the more parking there is, the more convenient parking there is, the more people will choose to drive to an area rather than ride their bike or walk or share a ride. And of course, the converse is also true. So parking to me is, if the district is concerned about greenhouse gases, climate change, vehicular safety, pedestrian safety, maintaining our natural look and feel, if all of those things are valuable to the board, then adding more parking is not the way to achieve those goals. If we truly get a good active transportation network in place where people feel comfortable moving about the city, our very small city, on foot and on wheels, that can go a long way to reducing both the need and the demand for parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
One thing I would add to that that's paradoxical is that if we were just talking about local facilities, that makes a lot of sense because you would want to encourage local residents to walk or ride to these various facilities. But if there were to be some sort of regional interpretive center there, then it becomes just the opposite. You're wanting to pull people off the freeway, that people in cars, they need a place to park. So that would be a consideration relative to this site versus something closer to the freeway.
Yeah, but what people forget is there's a lot of very unused parking on streets all around some of these facilities. And people like to drive right up to the, we're used to driving up to our home. We want to drive right to our front door or in the garage. And we forget that, people can walk 3 minutes, 5 minutes. And even with that short of a walk, a whole bunch of parking becomes available that is currently unused, but maintained, repaved, snowplowed continuously over the years. All of Lake Street has on-street parking, but I can't tell you if I've seen more than 3 or 4 cars on most of that upper Lake Street section since I've been here.
All right, Michael, thank you for sharing. It's always good to have your input. I am going to move on. We've got a couple of others. Brandy, go ahead.
Actually, I have a question for Jean. Do those grants cover planning and CEQA, or is it just for construction? Or do you know?
I do know. Am I hearable? I do know. And they have different grants for different things. So it is, the government, this section is huge. So we'd have to decide what kind of grant you want to apply for. They have all different kinds. This is one I took at this university I went to, and the grant is not easy to write. It's going to take somebody who really knows how to write grants and willing to put a lot of time into it. But they give, we were trying for a $70 million grant. So, yeah, have money. But
I'm assuming they're highly competitive.
Yes, of course, it's the whole United States. So, but we are perfect. I'm just saying. You see all these. They're looking for small communities that are having economic problems, that this would really enhance their community and provide jobs, provide a reason for their economy to flourish. So many things it would come under. It's just amazing.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess talking on Michael's point, and then Tom brought it up with visitors and parking and off-street parking and impacts on the neighborhood, because while it's zoned, I'm assuming correctly, to put those facilities there, we're also dealing with neighborhoods and the impact of traffic, which of course CEQA would bring up. So it would be interesting to see studies on the delicate balance of having too much parking and not enough parking. Because if there's not enough parking, we're not going to get the visitors that we would need in there. And if we have too much parking, you're encouraging, like Michael said, you're encouraging people to drive right up to the door. And then also about parking for expansion in the future.
All right, and in relation to this conversation about parking, we do have a comment on Facebook from Jamie Wright, who says that with sports events, especially those coming out of the area with potentially multiple kids involved, it's much more convenient to have parking nearby. Jamie, thanks for sharing your comment with us on Facebook, and I'm keeping an eye on it. So if there's anything you want to add, please feel free to do so. Jean, did you have another comment that you wanted to make?
I did.
Okay.
I would say that I thought the trails idea, that everything interconnecting like that, is also, I think, a reason that people would walk more, especially as all of us have become, I think, more health conscious. And in our small community, I think that idea for trails and everything centrally located, we might not need all that parking, but for future growth, like you're talking about, for out-of-town visitors or for big events, you would need the parking. So difficult decision, but I think the trails idea is fantastic.
All right, thanks, Jean. All right, folks, so we've appreciated having you here tonight and sitting in. I know several of you are listening, and I'm sure, interested to hear and hear the types of things that the district is considering, and some of this is reflective of conversations that we've had with other partners in the community. So I believe at this point, Tom, we have reached the end of the material for the evening. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right, folks. Well, this is about us hearing from you in relation to the presentation of the information. So if anyone else has anything they'd like to share right now, we'd love to hear from you. And if you don't now, but you think of something later that you want to add in, Shannon's just shared to the screen. The master plan update survey is online. You can answer questions related to the Youth Sports Park survey, and you're also always welcome to get in touch with staff and to chat with board members, although getting in touch with staff is a great way to move things forward. So with that, Shannon, do you have some closing comments for the evening?
I'd just like to thank everybody once again for participating tonight. Your input is extremely important as we put together the master plan. And this is just one of those pieces, and this is the dream big piece. And so if you know somebody who was unable to attend tonight, please have them view this recording. It's going to be available on our website as well as on Facebook for a while. And like Renee said, we want that input continuously. Whenever there's an idea out there, I'd love to hear it. And I know Tom would love to hear it and integrate it into our master plan. So please feel free to call anytime. And thanks again.
All right, everybody. And with that, that is the end of the evening for us. I need a motion to adjourn, and we will wrap this up.
So move. This is Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
And second from Bruce.
All right. Thank you.